Okay, part 2 is that we are trying to discover the rule for adding opposite signs. So what that means is you would add a positive and a negative. Now it could also be a negative and a positive, but they have opposite signs. So we're going to see if we can discover this rule. Here we go. We'll start with representing this on the number line. 5, so that's a positive number. We're going to go 5 spaces to the right. From there, we're going to use the next number because it's it's 5 and negative 3. So the negative 3 tells us to go 3 spaces to the left. So from here, we go 1, 2, 3 spaces. This is where I land. So that's negative 3. This is 5. Now, how long is the arrow that represents 5? Well, the absolute value of that arrow, the distance of it, is 5. What direction does it point? Right, because it's positive. How long is the arrow that represents negative 3? The absolute value or distance of this arrow is 3. And which direction does it point? Left, because it's negative. All right. Which arrow is longer? Well, looking at just the lengths, 5 or 3, the 5. What is the sum if you were to represent the sum using an arrow? Ooh. So the sum is 2. So using an arrow, that would be here. Maybe I like it a little better just on top of that one. Okay, yeah, I like that better. So, right here's the sum. I've highlighted it. Okay, so there's the sum. How long would that arrow be, and which direction would it point? It would be 2. Absolute value of 2 is 2. 2 units long, and that arrow is going to the and right because it's positive. Let me scoot this up. There we go. Okay, so interesting. Now, I'm noticing something that I'm going to go ahead and throw out there. I think about that idea of 0 pairs, and I see some overlap already on this diagram. So this overlapping part here is a 0 pair. It cancels each other out, and look what's left, your answer. So that's probably important. We're going to move on to the bottom of this page. Yes, it's beautiful. All right, so what are we doing now? 4, switch my colors. Use hot pink and Robinson blue maybe today. Okay, 4. That's a positive 4. So from 0, I'm going to go to the right 4 spaces. Then I'm going to be adding, so positive 4 and negative 7. I'll be adding negative 7. From this point, I'm going to go left 7 spaces. That's 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I'll put my labels there. I forget that so often. Circle your answer. Okay. Now, if I'm thinking about what I did at the top of this page, this part right here cancels each other out. So if I broke that arrow right there, I would have, if I broke that arrow right there, divided it up, that's 4 and 3. They're both negative. Alright, so that's just me thinking out loud. Now I'm going to look at the problem. In the 2 examples above, what's the relationship between the length of the arrow representing the sum? So here's this arrow representing the sum. The arrow representing the sum. and the lengths of the arrows representing the two addends. Okay, the addends, go back to this color. The two addends, there's the addends. Okay, that's just a fancy word. I think you start that word maybe first grade. It is a word that you hear but don't use a lot. Two addends, the numbers being added. Okay, back up. In the two examples above, the relationship between the length of the arrow representing the sum and the two addends. Alright, so looking here, the arrow representing the sum was 2 units. Okay, and here's what I notice. The longer arrow, if I do the longer arrow, minus the absolute value of the longer arrow minus just the length. So when I just want the distance or the length, that's why I use these absolute value symbols. Okay? The shorter arrow. So I've taken the absolute value of the longer arrow minus the absolute value of the shorter arrow, and that gives me 2, because the absolute value of 5 is 5, and the absolute value of 3, so you got 5 minus 3 is 2. Okay? And I know that it's positive because the longer arrow was positive. The longer arrow is positive, and that tells me my sign. The longer arrow indicates your sign for the answer. Okay, let's see. Let's look at that in this one. All right, so here in the second example, if we do that same thing, we'll take the longer arrow. The longer arrow in this case is this -7. So the absolute value of -7 minus the absolute value of 4, which would be 7 minus 4 is 3. That is the number part of my answer, okay? That distance, the difference in the distance. Now, my answer is -3, because look, this is the longer arrow, and it was negative. So my final answer is going to be -3. So let's answer these questions, because that's what they were asking. Okay, what's the relationship between the length of the two arrows and the length of the arrow representing the sum? So, the distance, which is absolute value of the longer arrow minus the distance, absolute value. Distance and absolute value mean the same thing. Okay, so the distance of the absolute value of the longer arrow minus the distance or the absolute value of the shorter arrow is the distance of the sum. Okay, so the distance of the sum, the absolute value of the sum. All right. Now, the direction of the arrow and the sum. Okay. The sum, which is the answer, has the sign or the direction of the longer arrow, which in math terms, longer arrow means the number with the greater absolute value. Now, it might feel like I'm speaking a different language at the moment, but it's important that you record these things. Right now, maybe you're just writing this down and you're just becoming familiar with these words. Maybe absolute value doesn't feel as foreign as it used to, but it's important that you become familiar with these words, that you know these words. So I'm asking you and telling you to write these words down as we go over it. I am very intentional about the words I'm using so that you will have the understanding that you need. And it may take a little while to develop it. Math is sometimes considered a different language, like you are learning how to speak math, and that will help you understand it. So, write a rule, and what we're going to do is just flip on to the next page because they've written a rule for us, and here it is. When you're adding rational numbers with opposite signs, you subtract the absolute value and use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. You should maybe write that down a couple times. Become very familiar. So, circle the integer with the greater absolute value. Which arrow would be longer? That one. And it's positive, so my answer will be positive. I'm just going to use signs this time. This one, negative. Okay, look at this one. Greater absolute value. This one, greater absolute value. Okay. Then you're going to actually find the sums here. Okay. So greater absolute value, my answer is going to be negative. 10 minus 7 is 3. Negative 3. You could draw a number line here. We should probably sketch one out really quick. Okay, negative 10, 7, 3. Okay. 8 plus negative 16. Answer will be negative 8. Negative 16. Land at negative 8. 16 minus 8 is 8. 8, 16. Okay. Greater absolute value here. 65. Number line 65, then back 12. So your answer will be positive 53. We should circle our answers to make them stand out more. That's a good practice to have. And this one, negative 126, positive 105. Your answer here is going to be negative 1. That one had a greater absolute value. It was longer. Okay. I believe I'm going to have to make a third short video for this one.